introduction to calling bob doubles for those who've not called it before. I am going to make the assumption that everybody knows what bobs are and what to do in bob doubles. So it's actually just about the sorts of things to think about if you're calling it for the first time. And like Ed says, I don't want to just talk for half an hour. You know, I'm quite happy to be interrupted and to try and make it feel like it's a training session. So, you know, Ed's going to be watching the sort of chat channel and things like that, and guiding me if I need to just stop and answer questions. And also, I guess before we get going, I just do want to thank Ed and Sue and everyone who's been involved, Pat and Ruth probably, in terms of the ideas around these training programs, because there's a few more scheduled to come up. So hopefully you'll think that's a good idea, and we can do some more in a few months, every month for the next few months. Right, I am going to start by seeing if I can share screen. And I've made my mouse nice and big because I got some feedback from the last talk that I gave that my mouse is too small. So it's really, really big. Hopefully you can see it as a great big pointy thing now. So I'm going to go to presenter view, which hopefully I don't think you can see. You can just see the main slide. So what we're going to talk about is I want to basically talk about what I think is the easiest extent of playing bob doubles, and then have a look at some other extents that you can call. Then I want to go on and talk about some of the tips of how to do it and to sort of have confidence that you're doing it right, and then to look at some other touches as well. I guess the first thing to talk about, lingo. The language in Bellringing is so confusing, isn't it? So I've just used a phrase there called both extent and 120 and touch, and they basically all roughly refer to the same thing. So if someone says to you in the tower, can you call an extent of bob doubles, what they mean is, can you call 120 of bob doubles? Now 120, actually that phrase refers to the fact that there's 120 different rows that you can have in any 5-bell method. It's factorial 5. So it basically means it's a way of ringing all the possible changes on 5 bells. So and for some reason it's just shortened to 120. So people may say to you, can you call out an extent or 120 of bob doubles? And they're all referring to roughly the same thing. Now a touch, if someone says, can you call a touch of bob doubles, that just means something with bobs in it. It doesn't mean exactly a full extent or 120. So just to sort of clarify some of these language things to start with. So like I said, I'm going to assume that you all know what happens at a bob and you know what that means in bob doubles. And many of us will have seen something like this, which is basically a set of rules that if you are going to do this, then this happens instead. And that's one way of understanding what happens at a bob. Now, another way of understanding what happens at a bob, some of you may have seen, may have looked at bob doubles in this way as well. So in bob doubles, I want to talk about this to start with. We plain hunt, don't we, in bob doubles? And when you're on 5 bells, the place notation, if you like, don't worry too much about what that means, but the way it is drawn out on a grid like this means that for most of the lead, you've got one bell staying in one place and the other 4 bells swapping as 2 pairs each blow. And when we ring bob doubles, most of the lead is plain hunting. So that means that you've got a bell in first, I'm going to look at you this way, a bell in first place, another 2 bells swapping, and then a bell in fifth place and the other 2 bells swapping underneath. And that's what happens. That's what generates plain hunting on five bells. And then we know, don't we, that when we get to a lead end, as we know, is the backstroke when the treble is leading. So it's this bit here, this blow here. We have to do something differently. And because we're on 5 bells, we can't, if we have just one bell staying in the same place, it forces 2 pairs to swap. We can't have just 2 bells staying in the same place, because otherwise you've got 3 bells left over, and you know, so you end up having to have 3 bells staying in the same place. You've got the treble staying in the same place, the second staying in the same place, and the bell in 5th place staying in the same place, which forces these 2 to swap, and they have to swap, they have to dodge, because otherwise you'd get the same row appearing twice. And this is what makes it bob doubles. And I think we should know all of this, and it forms these patterns, doesn't it? Now, in terms of what's happening at a bob, looking at it from a grid point of view, rather than the rules of, if I was doing seconds, I'm going to run out, looking at it from a grid point of view, still 3 bells stay in the same place, so the treble does, but this, and the 5th does, but also, rather than the bell in 2nd place staying in the same place, it's now the 4th, and that forces these 2 bells to swap. And that's where we know, that's where this running out, running in, and making the bob comes from. So the green bell is running out, the blue bell, as you can see on here, is running in, and the pink one is making the bob, or making fourths, as it's sometimes known. So that's a quick recap of what's happening. But what's interesting about it, in terms of if you were going to call it, is the bell that's in 5th place stays the same, doesn't it? It stays the same, it's unaffected. And many of you, probably, hopefully all of you, will have run touches where you've been unaffected, but bells beneath you are swapping around. So is that comfortable with everybody, as a point to start with?
Yes.
Okay, fab. So the easiest way of starting to call your first touch of bob doubles is to call the bobs from this bell that's in 5th place, so that you are unaffected. So if you were to put a bob in when you're about to do your long 5ths, as this bell in orange is going to do, you're unaffected, but what you'll be doing is you'll be asking these 3 bells underneath you to alter themselves, and they'll rotate around, and one of them will run in, one of them will run out, and one of them will make the bob. So if you do that once, that's great, you've changed those 3 bells around. If you were then to carry on and do your 3-4 up next, you know, to carry on through the circle of work and do your 3-4 up next time, and then your seconds, and then your 3-4 down, and then you get to long 5ths again, if you put another bob in, these same 3 bells are affected, and they will rotate themselves around. One will run in, one will run out, and one will make the bob. And so you've put 2 bobs in. And then if you were to go through the whole course, through the circle of work again, so the 3rd time you get up to ringing long 5ths, you put another bob in, these 3 bells will rotate around again. And because 3 bells have rotated 3 times, they'll be, excuse me, back to their normal position, their home position, if you like, back into the normal playing course. And then it will come round whenever it comes round to, to the end of the whole course. So the easiest and simplest way of calling a touch of an extent or 120 of bob doubles is to call yourself unaffected 3 times. Okay. Excuse me. So what does that actually look like? So first of all, the question is, when do you put the bob in? Now, hopefully you've all experienced bob, so you all know instinctively when this is. As with pretty much any instruction in bell ringing, when you make the instruction, it takes effect 2 blows later. And we know in bob doubles that the bob takes effect in the backstroke of the treble's lead, so that the lead end, as it's known. So 2 blows before that is when the treble is in 2nd place here. So that's when you call the bob, is when the treble is in 2nd place. Now, of course, if you're ringing the treble, that's really, really easy to spot. If you're not ringing the treble, that means you end up having to sort of, well, ideally, if you can watch the treble, that's even better, but that's quite hard at the beginning. So what you'll need to do is to learn when that is relative to the piece of work that you're doing. So if you're going to be calling yourself unaffected, it's this purple line, and actually it's bell number 5 in this diagram. You'll be calling it, as you can see, in your first blow in 5th place, which is a backstroke. and that's when you put the call in. Now, if you're going to be supremely fussy about this, there's backstroke and there's backstroke. So if you're on the 5th and you're waiting until your bell has actually struck and then you put the bob in, there's not very much time at all, milliseconds literally, before the treble's leading and this poor bell, number 3 here on green, has to suddenly think, oh my God, I'm going to do something different. And you really know, if you're calling on your backstroke in 5th place, but it's quite late on, perhaps you're nearly up to catching the Sally, you're not really giving these bells at the front much chance to think and react, particularly if you've got someone who's a little bit more inexperienced. So my advice is to do it as early as you can when you're up in 5th place, if you possibly can. Because actually, obviously, the treble has already struck. So if you're calling it when the treble's ringing in 2nd place, you're kind of just about up in 5th place. So if you can try and do it as early as you possibly can when you get to the back, that will be supremely helpful for those bells that are on the front and having to react quite quickly. And particularly also if you're ringing on quite heavy bells as well, the bells on the front are going to have to do something physically different to shift their speed. So if you're going to be quite fussy, and it's one of the things perhaps you might want to, when we get to practice and seek some feedback on, is, did I call it in to give you enough time notice to change your position? So a piece of advice there is to try and call it as early as you can. Now, which lead, if we look at this bell number 5, bell number 5 is the unaffected bell here. So if we start off ringing bob doubles, go bob doubles, which lead, if we're in a plain course, is this going to be? So how many leads need to have gone by before the first bob will happen? Does anyone want to either put it in the chat or unmute and answer the question? So how many leads go by in plain bob before we're going to call this one here with the 5th of unaffected?
Is it 4?
Yeah, 4. So it's the 4th lead. Because if we think about it, if we're in plain, we're ringing and we're on the 5th and you go plain bob, the circle of work says the next thing you do is 3 4 up. So that's lead number 1. The next thing you do is seconds, that's 2 leads. Next thing you do is 3 4 down, that's 3 leads. And then you do your long 5th. So it's the 4th lead if you're going to call the 5th unaffected. Let's pretend that doesn't say the 5th. Let's pretend you're on bell 4 and you want to call yourself unaffected. Which lead are you going to put the bob in the first time?
The after 1 lead.
Yeah, that's right. So it's the first lead. So that it's at the end of the first lead that you'll be calling the first bob. So it goes to show you can call yourself unaffected from any bell. You just kind of have to wait till you get there. But then the key thing is how many leads go by before you put the next bob in. And actually it's 4, isn't it? Because we know in the circle of work, that there's 3 leads go by. So 3 4 up, seconds, 3 4 down, they're complete leads. And then you get to your long 5ths again. So there's always 4 leads between. It's the second bob is the 4th lead later, and the 3rd bob is the 4th lead after that. So that's an extra sort of anchor point for you to know that, to have confidence, right, the bob's coming up, because you know where you are, but also if you can count the number of leads as well. And that can be quite helpful if you're calling it from the treble where you're not involved in the calls, because you can do that as well. You can actually say every 4th lead, whichever one you start with, I call another bob. So let's think about when it's going to come round. So if we're ringing the 5th and we know that we've we've called the first bob on the 4th lead, and then the second bob 4 leads after that, and the third bob 4 leads after that. When is it going to come round? Does anyone want to offer? Is it come round straight away, or does it come round in subsequent leads?
It'd be straight away, wouldn't it?
Yeah, be straight away, because you've called 3, so the bells are now back, 3 bobs, so the bells are now back into their home position, and actually the 5th's at the back, and so the 5th is in its home position where it should be. So you go bob, that's all, because it comes around literally on that backstroke there, as you can see here. Now going back to the 4th, if we were calling ourselves unaffected from the 4th, we've just said, haven't we, that the first call will come at the end of the first lead, and then 4 leads later there'll be a second call, and then 4 leads after that be a third call. How many leads, when will it come round? Will it come round straight away or in subsequent leads? And if so, how many?
Another lead.
Okay,
Those
1
3
lead,
leads.
3 leads, 3 leads. Okay, any more offers? It's 3 leads later. So because if you're on the 4th, if you want it to come round, it's going to come round when you're dodging 3, 4 down, because that's when you become 4th place bell, to use the lingo. So you're back in your 4th position. Now your bob's gone in when you're doing long 5ths. So you basically have to count the number of leads in the circle of work until you get round to 3, 4 down. So long 5th, so the next piece in the circle of work is 3, 4 up. That's 1 more lead. The next piece of work is seconds. So that's 2 leads later. The next piece of work is 3, 4 down. And that's your home position. So that's when it will come round if you're on the 4th. So the interesting thing is, and sometimes that can catch people out, sometimes you think, right, I've done the 3 bobs, but why are we still going? It's because you need to wait until everyone's gone through their circle of work back to their home position. And you'll need to, you can either count the leads or work it out or listen. Sometimes you can just listen, but you know that on your bell, if you've done 3 bobs, it's when you get back to your home position. So if you're on the 2nd, it's when you get back to making seconds, and then it should be coming round, and hopefully you should hear it as well. Okay, so
you have to be really fast with the calling if you're on the 5 when it comes round.
Yeah, that's right. If you're on the 5, you're saying bob, and then literally 2 plays later, that's all. And that can be quite interesting if you're trying to press a blooming thing on ringing room as well. Press your bell, press the instructions of B for bob, and TH for that's all, and so on. So just a little note I'll put in the bottom down here. Sometimes people would say to yourself, you can call yourself observation, and it's the same thing. It means calling yourself unaffected. It's the same, different lingo, same meaning. Any questions there? I'll just pause for a little second in case anyone's writing anything in chat or. Okay, so that's what I think is the easiest way of calling your first touch, and that's where I would suggest, unless you're being particularly brave and but if you've never done it before, I would suggest try that one to start with. Then there are other ways that you might want to call a touch, call a 120, call an extent, whatever language you want to use. And the reason why you might want to do that is twofold. One is it's a bit boring to keep calling the same touch. But secondly, if you've got someone who's not yet up to bobs in bob doubles, you're going to need to want for them to be the unaffected bell. And if that's not you, it means that you're going to have to call yourself affected. So you need to learn how to do this. So that means that you'll be one of these 3 bells that we were talking about who's rotating around. And it means you'll be rotating through these things that we already know of running in, running out, and making the bob. So there's 2 ways of memorizing how to do this. And in the same way that you memorize, I'm going to call a bob when I'm doing long fifths, when I'm unaffected, same thing. You memorize, I'm going to call myself to do these pieces of work. And there's two ways of memorizing it. So the first way is this thing in the middle. And so you can call yourself in any order. No, it has to be the same order, but starting at any point in this circle of in, out, make the bob. In, out, make. So you could call, if you called yourself to start in, then you have to call yourself next time out, and then you have to call yourself next time make the bob. And then it will come round because you've called 3 bobs. If you want to start calling yourself making the bob to start with, that's fine. So you call the bob for making. You have to call yourself in next time. You have to call yourself out next time. And then that's 3 bobs and it will come round. So that you can think of that one as in, out, make, or Isle of Man. Then you can use the mnemonic of Isle of Man if you want. So in, out, make. Or out, make, in, or make, in, out. You have to memorize it. You have to do it in that order of Isle of Man, starting at any point. And another way of looking at it, it's the same effect, but another way of looking at it, it's the same order in, out, but rather than using the M for make, you just say B for Bob, and you can just memorize it from this baby bio thing. So Bob in, out Bob, or out Bob in, whatever. So the key is you have to do it in that order, but it's up, these are 2 tips to basically try and help you remember that order. And then really the other thing to think about, therefore, is where do I put that call in? So it's still on this trebles backstroke here. And we looked that when we were on the 5th, we looked at, that's really your first blow in fifths. And then really you just have to kind of memorize it's the backstroke before the lead end that you put it in. So if you're about to run out, which is the green line, it's your backstroke at lead. If you're going to run in, which is the blue line, then you put the call in when you've just left the back. Don't leave it too late. When you've just left the back down into 4th place. And if you're going to make the bob, it's when you've just passed the treble and you're moving up into 3rd place, and that's where you put the call in there. And it's useful to try and sort of remember that if you can. Yeah, I mean, it's another way of doing it is particularly for these bells which are quite close to the treble, you just, all right, just past the treble, the treble's just there, right? Okay, the bob goes in now. So let's have a think now about perhaps this green line. So this bell here. So let's say let's bell number 3. So its first bob is going to run out. So out. What's it going to be doing for its next bob?
Making.
Yeah, making. Yeah, making the bob. So if we're looking at the Isle of Man mnemonic, out, make the bob, and then obviously what's it going to do for its next one? It's going to be running in. Okay. So and you'll find that they're 4 leads apart, because we know that we've learned that from when it's unaffected. So if the 3rd has called itself out, make the bob, in, when is it going to come round? How many leads later? So it's going to take some thinking through. So the third bob is out, make the bob, in, right? So it's in, so it's running in. So instead, it should have been doing 3 fall down. Instead, it's run in. So how many leads later? 3, that's right. So it's run in. So its next piece of work in the circle of work is 3 fall down, that's 1 lead. Its next piece of work is long fifth, that's 2 leads. Its next piece of work is 3 fall up, and that's its home position. So 3 leads later, it comes round and you say, that's all. Okay, so you're starting to see that knowing the circle of work is really quite important because it helps you dictate sort of, you know, how many leads you've got to go. Okay, any questions with that? Okay, so you've now got 4 different extents that you can call. You've got your unaffected, and then you've got any of these 3 combinations, whichever one you want to start with: in, out, make in, out. I personally prefer the Isle of Man one than the bio one, but it's up to you. So you've got 4 different 120s, and basically that is it for 120s. That is the only combination. So you've got 4 different possible things that you can do. Now I've put this here. We'll just I'm just conscious of time. I don't think actually we're going to have time. I was just a little test sort of thing for you, that if there was a bob called in the first lead, what's the second bell going to be doing? What's the third bell going to be doing? What's the fourth bell going to be doing? What's the fifth bell? Let's just do one then. So if there is a bob in the first lead, the second is going to be doing what?
3, 4.
It was going to be doing 3, 4 down. So what's it going to be doing?
Running in.
In. Okay, so if you called a bob in the first lead, the second is going to do in, and then the next call it's going to do out, and then the next call it's going to do make. What's the third bell doing if you called a bob in the first lead? What's its sequence of 3?
Going to make.
Mm,
Oh, no.
no.
Gonna run out.
It's going to go out, and what's it going to do next?
Make seconds.
In the next bob. Out.
Make.
In, and then bob.
Does everyone agree with that?
Isn't it make and then in?
Yeah, so Isle of Man. So if it goes out first time, Isle of Man. So of O and then M. So the second call it would be making, and the third call it would be running in. It's tricky. Okay, fourth bell. If you're on the fourth and there's a bob in the first lead.
Unaffected.
Unaffected. So you'll know 3 times you'll be unaffected. So actually you're the unaffected bell. And then if you're on the fifth and there's a bob in the first lead. What will you be doing? Where are you in the Isle of Man?
You're gonna make the bob.
Make. So what's the next one? At the second bob.
In.
I heard one out or one in then. So Isle
You were
of.
muted. So that I could see people were answering, but they were muted.
All right. Okay. So it's Isle of Man. So we're starting at the M. Make is the first one. Second one is in. And the third one is out. That's right. So make, in, out. If the call's in the first lead and you happen to be on the fifth. So these are the things, when you get into your practice groups, these are the things that whoever's leading the group will be starting to talk you through, well, talk through with you in advance, hopefully, to sort of say, okay, what are you going to do? And therefore, what are you going to do next? And so on. And excuse me. So just a few bits of things that I think are useful tips, just some controls in ringing room. I'll tell you what, I'll leave the host of the ringing rooms to go over those. What I would suggest that you try and do when you go into your ringing room is to, if you've got a headset, try and actually say it rather than pressing those keys. I find, you know, it's a bit like trying to pat your head and rub your tummy at the same time. I find it too hard. And also it sort of simulates what, you know, it's what you're going to be doing when we get back in the tower. So, but if you haven't got a headset, unfortunately, you need to do it off the keyboard. So tips, every fourth lead, we know that. Now, this next tip is super, super helpful. If you can get to the point, obviously you know what you're going to do, but if you can get to the point of noticing who the observation bell, who the unaffected bell is, if it's not you, that will be so, so helpful. So I think the reason why it's called observation bell is because you observe it being unaffected. So if you can, if you're ringing the second, you're going to put a bob in at the first lead, you're going to be doing the in, out, make. But as we've just discovered, bell number 4 is going to be unaffected. So the reason why that's helpful is if you can be kind of keeping an eye on the 4th as well and watching where it is and going, oh, right, it's going to be doing long 5ths next time. It just gives you that extra little security blanket of going, right, okay, I definitely know that this is the right place for the bob coming up. And it's also helpful should you happen to go wrong. And you just think, oh, what am I doing? You know, that sort of thing. If you can happen to notice, right, you know, the 4th is observation bell, and I can see it's making seconds, this lead, right, definitely there's no bob here because it's making seconds, and I need to wait until it's doing long 5ths before I put that bob in. So if you've never done calling before, don't worry about this, because this is a sort of an advanced level. But if you are starting to be quite comfortable calling these 120s in terms of what you're doing, then see if you can watch and spot who is the observation bell as well. And when we get into our groups, no doubt the leaders of those groups will be saying, okay, you're going to call this, let's see if you can work out whose observation bell at the same time, because that's super, super, super handy. And whenever I call bob doubles, I have to say I use that as an anchor point. Anyone who heard my talk last time will know that I'm an absolute obsessive about knowing where the treble is, and I always watch the treble if I can, just because it helps me have that extra security blanket about, okay, right, I'm passing the treble in 2-3, therefore I'm coming up to 3-4, 3-4 up, and I know I'm not putting the call in till I'm making seconds, so right, therefore it's not this lead. Right, you know, it's that extra sort of security blanket of knowing and watching where the treble is. And then a final tip is, if you can, watch the bells that are affected. So say you're unaffected at the back, you're long 5th. See if you can actually watch the bells run in and run out and make the bob, so that you know that they've done it right. You know, that's quite an advanced skill as well, but it will help you know and have that confidence that everything's right there. If you can watch that. Out of all of those, what's my priority? For me, it's trying to spot the observation bell and keeping an eye on the observation bell, if you can do that. And then what else have I got here? Oh yes, what if you make a mistake? So we all do this. If I may confess, there's many a court appeal that I've called and I've made a mistake in it and gone, ah! And it really does not matter. It definitely doesn't matter if it's just a touch or just your normal Sunday. And frankly, it really kind of doesn't matter too much, even if you're in a court appeal, because, you know, nobody's particularly precious about this in court appeal. It matters a little bit if you're in appeal, but not in so much a court appeal. Please don't shoot me for saying that, but that's what I think. So if you happen to miss the call and you know you're, oh God, it should have been that lead and I've missed it, just don't say anything and wait a whole course until it comes round again, and then do it next time. Just, you know, it's only an extra 3 and a bit leads. It only takes like, you know, a minute and a couple of minutes, something like that. So just wait a whole course and then do it next time. If you happen to put a call in too early, a lead too early, you've basically swapped the bells around or some more, and the observation bell is now affected, and it's really all started to go a bit horribly wrong. If it's gone too far past the lead end and you think, right, there's no way I'm going to get this right, my advice is basically start to then call yourself observation, and it will come round. We don't know whether it's going to come round after the first bob of observation, the second or the third, but it will come round. It might come round at hand stroke even, but because you're basically triggering all the sequences of on 5 bells to come up. At some point it will come round, so you just have to be alert to it and say that's all and like hopefully no one will notice. So they're my 2 tips about if you make a mistake, and you will, and that's totally fine. I still do after 40 something years of ringing. So they're my 2 tips there.
So that will come round with just one call at observation.
I don't know how many. I don't know how many calls at observation, because you're not. It depends on the rotation of where the bells are. It could be up to 3. It might be 1. It might be 2.
Okay.
So you just have to have faith. So call yourself observation until you find it comes round. But it will be. There are only 120 different possible rows, and basically you're just waiting for that row to come up whenever it will come up. If you're getting, if you don't have time for that, and Sunday service is about to start, then if you get close, like 1 2 4 3, or 1 3 2, you just say call it round it back, something like that, if you don't have time to do that, because a 120 takes, I don't know, roughly 5 minutes, something like that. Okay, so they're 120s. Like I say, they take 5 minutes ish roughly. There are other touches that you can do. A nice, really, really easy one is 2 consecutive bobbed leads. Now, what will happen after 2 leads? Can anyone work that out? So 2 consecutive bobbed leads. Let's think about it. If you're on the 2nd or the 3rd, you're going to both run in and run out, both leads, aren't you? If you're on the 5th, at the first bobbed lead, you're going to make the bob, and you're going to go the 2nd lead, you'll be back up in long 5ths. So you're back to your home position again. 2nd and 3rd are back to the home position. The 5th is back to its home position. So by de facto, the 4th will be back to its home position. So it will come round after 2 leads. If you put 2 consecutive bobs in, it comes round. Nice and easy. I use this quite a lot when I'm teaching people bobs and bob doubles. So you can basically get to the point of what you want for them to practice. So if you want for them to practice running in, you just keep calling that, and they keep running in. If you want for them to practice running out, you let it go as a plane all the way through to the point that they're making seconds, and you do 2 consecutive bobs and they practice running out. So quite handy for teaching. Another touch is a 60, so it's half of the 120, and PB, it just basically means plain lead, bobbed lead, plain lead, bobbed lead, plain lead, bobbed lead. So basically you call a bob every other lead, and it doesn't really matter whether you start with it as a plain lead or you call the bob first. But if you do that, every other lead, it will come round, and it's slightly longer than a plain course, but not as long as a 120. So you might want to do that if you just want a slightly longer touch than just a plain course, or but you don't have time for 120. The other time that you use a 60 is if you're trying to call a quarter peal. Now, a quarter peal, the closest number of changes that you can get in bob doubles to ringing a quarter peal, a true quarter peal, is 1260. So the easiest way of doing that is to call a 60, which is that 12, that 60 there. So you call one of those 2, and then that leaves you with 1,200 changes still to call. Now that is in effect, isn't it, if you can do your maths, 10 120s. So if you're calling a quarter peal, you call 160, either that one or that one, and then you call 10 120s. Now there are 4 of them, and we've gone through the 4 of them, the unaffected, and then those 3 variations of in, out, and make. So you've got 4, and basically you just need to repeat them in choose whatever order to do them in. My strong advice is not to call the same one 10 times, because you will just lose count. You know, have I done 6 or have I done 7? You will just lose count. So my classic, when I do it, I tend to put the 60 in first, get it out of the way. And then I tend to call the 5th observation twice. So the 5th is when you're at the first call goes at the end of the 4th lead. So you're kind of letting it all settle down, getting into a nice rhythm. And I tend to call the 5th observation, and I do it twice. And then I tend to just work my way through. I just work my way through 2 of 120 type, and then 2 of another, 2 of another, 2 of another, and that's your 10 versions. So I tend to do them in 2s, but you know, you can make them up as you like, really. I don't mind. But my strong advice is not to call the same one 10 times, because you will lose count. Okay, I think that's, yeah, questions and comments. That was a whistle stop tour through. So what questions do people have? I'm going to stop sharing.